I walked into a Spanish church on a Tuesday afternoon, planning to crush the Eucharist in my hands and film myself destroying what Catholics call the body of Christ. Instead, when my fingers touched the monstrance, a light erupted from the host, my knees collapsed, and a voice spoke my name, a name no one in that building could have known. What happened in those next 7 minutes changed everything I believed about power, about God, and about who Jesus really is. My name is Prince Khalid bin Yassir al-Rashid. I am 31 years old now, but on 2nd November, 2021, when I was 29, I entered St. Teresa's Catholic Church in a quiet coastal town in southern Spain with a mission I believed would settle the question of religious truth once and for all. I had planned everything carefully. I knew the Mass schedule. I had studied the moment when the Eucharist would be exposed and vulnerable. I was ready to prove that what Catholics worshipped as God was nothing more than bread, and that their faith was built on the most dangerous lie in human history. I did not come with fire. That would have drawn immediate attention and security. I came with something more calculated: my hands, my phone, and my absolute certainty that I was defending the honor of Allah. My plan was surgical and private. I would seize the consecrated host during the quiet moments after communion, crush it before the small congregation, and record the entire event. The video would not go viral online. It would circulate privately among Islamic scholars and Saudi royals as proof that Christianity's central claim was nothing but theater and delusion. A theological humiliation. A truth-telling that would expose the weakness at the heart of Catholic faith. I had no idea that within 3 days of touching that Eucharist, everything I had been taught about Allah, about Jesus, and about the nature of divine power would completely collapse. I had no idea that the God I came to humiliate would meet me with such devastating love that I would lose my family, my title, my country, and my name, and count it all as gain. I cannot explain what happened to me in purely rational terms, and that reality has haunted and comforted me every day since. I was born into the house of al-Rashid, one of the lesser-known but deeply connected royal bloodlines in Saudi Arabia. We were not the ruling family, but we moved in circles of power and influence that most people will never experience. My grandfather had been an advisor to ministers. My father held positions that gave him access to religious authorities in Mecca. Our family home in Riyadh was a place where Islamic scholars would gather to discuss theology, politics, and the threat of Western influence on Muslim youth. From my earliest memories, I understood that we were guardians of truth in a world full of deception. Our wealth was not just privilege, it was responsibility. Our knowledge was not just education, it was spiritual armor. And our faith in Islam was not just belief, it was the only thing standing between civilization and chaos. My tutors were scholars trained in Mecca and Medina, men who had memorized the entire Quran and could debate theology in 3 languages. By age 12, I had memorized large portions of the Quran myself. By 16, I could argue Christian theology fluently in English, not because I wanted to understand it, but because I had been trained to destroy it in debate. My father would sit with me in his study after evening prayers and explain why Christianity was the most dangerous lie of all. Other religions deny God entirely, he would say, pouring tea with steady hands. But Christianity insults him. They claim God has a son. They claim God can be killed. They claim God can be eaten. He would pause, letting the absurdity sink in. This is not ignorance, Khalid. This is blasphemy dressed as devotion. I believed every word because I trusted him completely, and because everyone in our world reinforced the same message. I grew to view Christians with a mixture of contempt and pity. They were intelligent enough to recognize God's existence, but foolish enough to worship a man who died like a criminal. During my university years in London, I would watch them from a distance, carrying their Bibles, singing in their churches, speaking about Jesus as if he were more than a prophet. I felt intellectually superior every time I encountered their faith. I had the Quran. I had scholarship. I had clarity. What did they have? Stories about a carpenter who got crucified. But something shifted during those London years. I attended debates at Imperial College where Catholic theologians defended their faith against Muslim scholars. I expected them to admit that the Eucharist was symbolic, metaphorical, a ritual without substance. Instead, they spoke about it with terrifying certainty. They said the bread and wine literally became the body and blood of Jesus Christ. Not symbolically, not spiritually, literally, substantially, really. And they were willing to die for that belief. That disturbed me more than I wanted to admit. I began researching Eucharistic adoration late at night in my flat, watching videos of Catholics kneeling in silence before a small white host in a golden vessel. No music, no preaching, no spectacle. Just stillness and devotion so complete it looked like worship of the highest order. Something about that silence haunted me. In Islam, we bowed before Allah, the invisible, the transcendent, the one who could never be contained. But these Christians were bowing before bread, and they did not look foolish. They looked at peace. By 2021, my fascination had turned to something darker. I convinced myself that this belief was not just false, it was dangerous. It was deceiving millions of people and insulting God in the most intimate way possible. I believed that if someone with authority and credibility exposed the Eucharist publicly, proved it was powerless, the illusion would shatter. I decided that someone should be me. Ask yourself this question. Have you ever been so convinced that you were defending truth that you never questioned whether your certainty was actually pride in disguise? That was me for 29 years. I believed every argument I made against Christianity was righteous. I believed my contempt for the Eucharist was theological clarity. I never stopped to consider that my anger might be fear that what I was mocking might actually be real. In October 2021, I joined a Saudi cultural delegation traveling through Spain. Officially, we were there for diplomatic meetings and cultural exchange. Unofficially, I saw an opportunity. Spain was full of Catholic churches. Security would be minimal. And my royal status meant I could move freely without suspicion or searches. I chose my target carefully, a small church in a coastal town far from tourist crowds. A weekday afternoon mass with a handful of elderly worshippers. No media. No witnesses who could create an international incident. Just me, a priest, and the Eucharist exposed on the altar after communion. I told myself I was defending Islam. I told myself I was serving Allah. But looking back now, I realize I was serving something else entirely, my own need to be right. On November 2nd, 2021, I walked into that church carrying nothing but my phone and my absolute certainty. And I was about to discover just how wrong certainty can be. But to understand why I was willing to desecrate a church, why I believed this act would be righteous, you need to understand where I came from. You need to see the world that shaped me, the family that formed me, and the beliefs that drove me toward that altar with destruction in my heart. Let me take you back to the beginning. Back to the house of al-Rashid, where power was proof of truth, and doubt was the only unforgivable sin. I was 14 years old when I first learned about the Eucharist. My tutor, Sheikh Abdullah, had been explaining the various heresies of Christianity when he paused at this particular doctrine. His face darkened. They believe, he said slowly, that bread becomes the literal flesh of their prophet. That wine becomes his blood. And then they eat him. I remember laughing. It seemed too absurd to be real. But Sheikh Abdullah did not laugh. This is not symbolic, colored. They claim it is actual transformation. They bow before it. They worship it.
They build entire churches around this bread. He spat the last word like poison. That night, I felt something I had never felt before when thinking about Christianity: rage. Not the dismissive contempt I had for their claim that God had a son. Not the intellectual superiority I felt when they spoke of the Trinity. This was visceral. Primal. The idea that the creator of the universe, Allah, the eternal, the absolutely transcendent, could be reduced to flour and water made me physically ill. In Islam, shirk is the unforgivable sin, associating anything created with the Creator. We do not bow to images. We do not pray to statues. We do not touch the Quran without purification because even God's words deserve reverence. Yet here were millions of Catholics kneeling before bread, calling it God, placing it on their tongues as if the infinite could be consumed like food. It was not just wrong. It was the ultimate insult to divine majesty. By 16, I had been trained specifically to dismantle this doctrine in debate. My father brought in scholars who had studied at Al-Azhar University in Cairo, men who specialized in comparative theology. They taught me the Catholic arguments, transubstantiation, substance versus accidents, the Last Supper narrative, and then systematically showed me how to destroy each one. When they say, "This is my body," one scholar explained, remind them that Jesus spoke in metaphors constantly. I am the door. I am the vine. He was not literally wood or a plant. Why would he be literally bread? I memoized these rebuttals. I practiced them until they became reflexive. I was ready to demolish any Catholic who dared defend the Eucharist in my presence. But then came London. During my graduate studies at Imperial College, I attended an interfaith dialogue where a Catholic theologian named Dr. Catherine Walsh defended Eucharistic doctrine against a prominent Islamic scholar. I went expecting to see her stumble, to watch her admit that it was all symbolic after sufficient intellectual pressure. She did not stumble. When pressed on whether she truly believed bread became flesh, she leaned forward and said with quiet intensity, "I would die for that host. Not for a symbol. Not for a metaphor. For him. Really, physically, sacramentally present." The Muslim scholar laughed. "You would die for bread?" "I would die for Jesus," she replied. "And yes, he is present in that bread as surely as he walked the earth 2,000 years ago." Something in her certainty shook me. This was not blind faith. This was not ignorance. Dr. Walsh had a doctorate in molecular biology. She understood atoms and molecules and physical reality. Yet she believed, with her entire being, that substance itself could be transformed while appearance remained unchanged. I could not stop thinking about her words. I began watching videos of Eucharistic adoration late at night in my flat, scrolling through YouTube until 2 or 3 in the morning. I watched Catholics in churches around the world kneeling before the exposed host in ornate golden monstrances. No one preaching. No music playing. Just silence and people staring at bread as if it were the most important thing in the universe. And they looked peaceful. Certain. Complete. That terrified me more than anything. By 2021, I had convinced myself that this doctrine was not just theologically false, it was spiritually dangerous. It was deceiving millions, perhaps billions, of souls. And I believed that someone with credibility and authority needed to expose it publicly, to shatter the illusion so convincingly that even devout Catholics would be forced to question their faith. I decided that someone would be me. I would seize the Eucharist, crush it, and film the entire act. The video would circulate among Islamic scholars and Saudi royals, people who mattered, people who shaped religious discourse. It would be a theological humiliation so profound that Catholic intellectuals would spend years trying to explain it away. I did not see this as desecration. I saw it as liberation. I genuinely believed I was freeing people from a lie. That belief nearly destroyed me. But not in the way I expected. The town was called San Miguel del Mar, a fishing village 2 hours south of Valencia, the kind of place tourists passed through on their way to somewhere more exciting. Narrow cobblestone streets. Whitewashed buildings with terracotta roofs. The smell of salt and grilled sardines drifting up from the harbor. Perfect. I had spent 3 days identifying the right location. It could not be a cathedral, too many people, too much security, too much risk of creating an international incident. It could not be a tourist church where cameras captured every angle. I needed obscurity. Intimacy. A place where a weekday afternoon mass would draw only a handful of elderly locals who came out of habit rather than passion. St. Teresa's fit perfectly. A modest stone church built in the 1600s, tucked into a hillside overlooking the Mediterranean. The parish website listed a 3 p.m. Mass on Tuesdays with Eucharistic adoration following. I had called twice, pretending to be a curious visitor, and confirmed that Father Esteban typically had fewer than 10 attendees on weekdays. No media. No crowds. No complications. My royal status made everything easier. When I entered Spain with the cultural delegation, no one searched my bags. No one questioned my movements. I told my security detail I was visiting historical sites alone, something I did regularly, and they accepted it without suspicion. To them, I was an educated prince with scholarly interests. The idea that I would enter a church for anything other than academic tourism was unthinkable. I carried nothing that would trigger alarms. No weapons. No accelerants. Just my phone tucked in my jacket pocket, already set to record video at the touch of a button. My plan was surgical: wait until after communion when the priest placed the remaining hosts in the tabernacle or exposed one in the monstrance for adoration. At that moment, when everyone was still and quiet, I would approach the altar as if seeking prayer. Then I would seize the host, crush it in my fist, and capture the entire act on video while speaking clearly. This is bread. Only bread. Your God is not here. 30 seconds. That was all I needed. The church door was unlocked. It opened with a creak that seemed too loud in the afternoon stillness. I stepped inside and paused, unprepared for what hit me. The air felt different. Heavy, but not oppressive. Dense, like atmosphere itself had weight and texture. The smell of incense clung to everything, the stone walls, the wooden pews, even my clothes within seconds of entering. Sunlight poured through stained glass windows, casting colored shadows across the floor. Dust particles floated in the beams of light, suspended as if time moved differently in this space. I had been in mosques my entire life. I knew what sacred space felt like, the peace of orderly prayer, the dignity of submission. This was something else. Not peace exactly. More like presence. As if the building itself was paying attention. I shook off the thought. This was architecture and incense, nothing more. Catholics were experts at creating atmosphere, at manipulating emotion through sensory experience. I would not let aesthetics distract me from my mission. 6 people sat scattered in the pews. An elderly woman with a black lace mantilla covering her head. 2 men in work clothes who looked like they had come straight from construction sites. A middle-aged couple holding hands. A young woman with a rosary wrapped around her fingers. None of them looked at me. None of them seemed to notice or care that a stranger had entered. Father Esteban stood at the altar in green vestments, his back to the congregation, preparing for Mass. His voice was soft, almost musical, as he began the opening prayers in Spanish. The 6 worshippers responded in unison, their voices blending into something that sounded less like recitation and more like breathing. I slid into the back pew, my phone a hard presence against my ribs. My jaw clenched. My hands felt cold despite the warmth of the afternoon. This was a mistake, some part of me whispered. You should leave. But pride is louder than whispers. Pride reminded me of my mission, my purpose, my duty to expose this lie. I had come too far to turn back now. I watched Father Esteban move through the liturgy with practiced grace. I watched the congregation kneel and stand and respond. I watched the altar, waiting for my moment. And somewhere deep inside, deeper than I wanted to acknowledge, something began to crack. The Mass moved through its rhythms like water following ancient channels. Readings. Responsorial Psalm. Gospel proclamation. I watched it all with the detached analysis of someone observing a performance, noting the theatricality, the choreography, the ways Father Esteban used gesture and tone to create emotional response. This was manipulation, I told myself. Sophisticated, centuries-refined manipulation. Nothing more. Then came the liturgy of the Eucharist. Father Esteban lifted a small plate holding unconsecrated hosts and a chalice of wine. He spoke the words of institution in Spanish, but I knew them in English from my theological training. Take this, all of you, and eat of it, for this is my body which will be given up for you. His voice remained steady, unremarkable. No dramatic emphasis. No theatrical pause. Just words spoken as if they were the most natural thing in the world. Then he elevated the host above his head. The congregation knelt as one, a synchronized movement so fluid it looked rehearsed, though I knew it was simply habit. 6 people dropping to kneelers with heads bowed, hands clasped, complete attention focused on a piece of bread held in an old priest's hands. I remained seated. Deliberately. Defiantly. This is the moment I despise most, I thought, my jaw tight. This is when they believe heaven touches earth. When they claim the impossible becomes real. When they insist that substance changes while accidents remain. When they bow before flour and water as if the creator of galaxies could be contained in something a child could swallow. My hands gripped the pew in front of me. I wanted to stand up and shout the truth, that this was bread, only bread, would always be bread no matter what words were spoken over it. That their faith was beautiful but false. That their devotion was sincere but misdirected. But I held my tongue. My moment would come soon enough. Father Esteban moved through the remainder of the consecration, elevating the chalice, genuflecting, placing both on the altar with reverent care. The congregation responded to his prayers in voices barely above whispers. Everything felt hushed, suspended, as if the church itself was holding its breath. Then came communion. One by one, the 6 worshippers approached the altar rail. Father Esteban placed the host on their tongues with words I could not quite hear. Each person closed their eyes as they received. Each person returned to their pew and knelt with heads bowed, praying silently. I watched their faces. They looked like people who had just encountered something precious. Not ecstatic. Not overcome. Just certain. Quietly, deeply certain that what they had received was more than bread. It disturbed me how much their certainty disturbed me. Father Esteban returned to the altar with the remaining hosts. But instead of placing them in the tabernacle as I expected, he retrieved a golden monstrance, an ornate sunburst design with a circular glass center. He placed a single host in the center, then set the monstrance on the altar and knelt before it. The church fell completely silent. This was Eucharistic adoration. This was the moment when Catholics believed Christ was most fully present, most completely exposed, most available to be encountered. And this was my moment. No one was moving. No one was speaking. Father Esteban knelt with his back to the congregation, his head bowed, completely absorbed in prayer. The 6 worshippers knelt in their pews, equally absorbed. The only sound was the distant cry of seagulls outside and the faint whisper of wind against stained glass. My phone felt like a stone in my pocket. This is it, I told myself. This is what you came for. 30 seconds and it will be done. 30 seconds and you will have proven what they refuse to see, that their God is absent, their faith is empty, their devotion is wasted on bread that has no power and no presence. I stood. The movement felt too sudden, too loud. My legs were unsteady beneath me, though I could not understand why. I had done nothing physically demanding. Yet standing required effort, as if gravity had increased or the air had thickened. I took a step forward. Then another. My shoes echoed against the stone floor, sharp, distinct sounds that seemed to carry further than they should. One of the elderly women glanced back at me with mild confusion but not alarm. Perhaps she thought I was approaching for prayer. Perhaps she thought I was a late arrival seeking communion. She had no idea what I intended. Father Esteban remained motionless, unaware of my approach. The monstrance stood on the altar, the host visible behind glass, catching and reflecting the afternoon light. Just bread, I reminded myself with each step. Just bread. Prove it. End this delusion. Set people free. But with each step, something else grew inside me, something I did not want to name, something that felt like fear but could not be fear because I feared nothing about bread. 3 more steps. 2 more. 1. I reached the altar. My hand extended toward the monstrance. And everything changed. My fingers were inches from the monstrance when it happened. Not externally. Nothing in the church changed. The 6 worshippers remained kneeling. Father Esteban stayed motionless in prayer. The afternoon light continued pouring through stained glass. To anyone watching, I was simply a man reaching toward the altar. But internally, everything collapsed. An overwhelming pressure crushed my chest, not like a heart attack, but as if gravity itself had multiplied. My lungs fought for air that suddenly felt too thick to breathe. My vision blurred at the edges, the church tilting and swimming before my eyes. My hands began to shake. Violently. Uncontrollably. I tried to steady them, tried to force them toward the monstrance, tried to complete what I had come to do. But my body would not obey. My fingers trembled like I was suffering hypothermia, though sweat poured down my back. Then I saw the light. Not a beam shooting from heaven. Not a flash of lightning. But a radiance emanating from the host itself, soft, pulsing, alive. It was not blinding. I could look directly at it. But I could not look away. The gold of the monstrance reflected nothing. The light came from within the host, from the center of that small white circle of bread. It glowed with an intensity that had no earthly source, no scientific explanation. And as I stared, unable to move, unable to breathe properly, I understood with terrible clarity that I was not looking at bread. I was looking at someone. My knees gave out. I fell forward onto the marble floor, my hands slapping against cold stone. The impact jarred my bones, but I barely felt it. The crushing pressure in my chest intensified. My vision narrowed to a tunnel. I gasped for air like a drowning man. The church was completely silent. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, too fast, too loud. I could hear my breath coming in ragged gasps. Then I heard the voice. It did not boom. It did not echo. It did not come from any direction I could identify. It simply was, inside me and around me and through me all at once. Colored. My name. Spoken with infinite gentleness. Why do you come against me? Not an accusation. A question. Tender. Grieving. The weight of that realization shattered something fundamental inside me. No one in this church knew my name. I had told no one. Father Esteban did not know who I was. The 6 worshippers had never seen me before. I was anonymous, unknown, invisible. Yet he knew my name. He knew me. And in that moment of being known, truly, completely, devastatingly known, every wall I had built, every argument I had crafted, every certainty I had clung to turned to dust. Memories flooded my mind like a breaking dam. Every time I had mocked Christians in university debates. Every time I had felt intellectually superior while watching them worship. Every time I had dismissed Jesus as weak, as merely human, as a prophet who died and stayed dead. Every time I had planned this desecration, convinced I was serving God while plotting to destroy him. All of it played before me in an instant. And standing over all of it was not anger. Not judgment. Not the condemnation I deserved. Grief. Jesus grieved over me. Over my pride. Over my blindness. Over the years I had spent running from him while thinking I was running toward truth. That grief undid me more completely than any wrath could have. I wept. Not quietly. Not with dignity. I sobbed into the cold marble floor, my body shaking as if something was being physically torn from my chest. Tears poured from my eyes, mixing with sweat, soaking into stone that had absorbed centuries of prayers. I did not see Jesus with my physical eyes. But I knew, with a certainty more solid than any theological argument, more real than any empirical evidence, that he was there. Standing over me. Present in that host I had come to destroy. Alive. Real. And looking at me with a love I had never known, never imagined, never believed could exist. A love that knew everything I had done and loved me anyway. A love that had watched me plan his humiliation and responded with mercy. A love that had let me walk all the way to the altar not to punish me, but to save me. I wept like a child discovering he is not an orphan after all. Father Esteban approached slowly. I sensed rather than saw him kneel beside me. He did not touch me. He did not speak. He simply began to pray in Spanish, soft, rhythmic words I could not understand but felt in my bones. I do not know how long I remained there, prostrate on the floor of that Spanish church, weeping before the God I had come to prove was absent. Time stopped meaning anything. All that mattered was the presence. The love. The devastating, beautiful, terrifying reality of Jesus. I cannot tell you how long I remained on that floor. Minutes? An hour? Time lost all meaning in the presence of someone who existed outside of time. What I can tell you is this: Jesus did not leave. Even after the initial overwhelming encounter, even after the flood of memories and the breaking of my pride, he remained. Not as a feeling. Not as an emotion I conjured. But as a presence more real than the marble beneath my face, more solid than the walls surrounding me. I did not see him with my eyes. There was no vision of a bearded man in robes, no apparition hovering above the altar. But I knew him with a certainty that made physical sight seem like a pale imitation of real knowing. I knew his attention was on me. I knew His love surrounded me. I knew He was watching me with a tenderness I had never experienced from any human being. And that love was incomprehensible. It did not excuse what I had come to do. It did not pretend my intentions had been noble. It did not minimize the hatred I had carried or the destruction I had planned. The love saw all of it, every dark thought, every prideful moment, every instant of contempt, and refused to turn away. That should have been impossible. In Islam, I had been taught that Allah's mercy was conditional on repentance, that divine love must be earned through obedience and submission. Yet here was a love that gave itself before I had changed anything, before I had repented, while I was still His enemy. It broke me in ways I am still discovering. Father Esteban remained kneeling beside me, his voice a gentle murmur of Spanish prayers. He did not try to touch me or comfort me. He did not ask what was happening or demand explanation. He simply prayed, creating a space for whatever God was doing in my soul. Looking back, I realize he must have seen this before. He must have known that sometimes the most sacred thing a priest can do is simply be present while Jesus does his work. Eventually, I do not know when, my weeping subsided. Not because the presence left, but because my body had simply exhausted itself. My chest still ached. My throat was raw. My face felt swollen and hot. I pushed myself up slowly, my arms shaking with the effort. Father Esteban offered his hand and I took it, letting him help me to my feet. My legs were weak, unsteady, as if I had been sick for days. The monstrance still sat on the altar. The host looked ordinary now, just a small white circle behind glass, catching the late afternoon light. The supernatural radiance was gone. But I was not ordinary. Something essential had changed, something deeper than belief or opinion. The man who had walked into this church planning desecration no longer existed. In his place stood someone I did not yet know, someone broken and reborn in the same moment. Father Esteban looked at me with eyes that held no judgment, only compassion. He started to speak, but I shook my head. I could not talk. Could not explain. Could not find words for what had happened. I walked toward the exit on unsteady legs, my face still wet with tears. The 6 worshippers had returned to their prayers, either unaware of what had occurred or too polite to stare. I left without a word. Without the video I had come to make. Without the proof I had planned to capture. My phone remained in my pocket, untouched, useless. Outside, the Mediterranean sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. The fishing village looked exactly as it had when I entered, whitewashed buildings, narrow streets, the smell of salt and sardines. But I saw it differently now. Everything looked fragile and precious, as if I was seeing the world for the first time. I walked back to my hotel in a daze. For 3 days, I could not eat. Food tasted like ash in my mouth. My body rejected nourishment as if it was still processing something that had nothing to do with physical hunger. I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt that presence again, not forcing me, not demanding anything, simply waiting. Patient. Loving. Unavoidable. I tried to pray the Islamic prayers I had said 5 times daily since childhood. My lips formed the words but they felt hollow, like speaking a language I had forgotten how to understand. The prayers bounced off the ceiling of my hotel room, going nowhere. On the second night, I opened the drawer of the bedside table and found a Bible. Spanish and English, side by side. I had read the Gospels before, always with a critical eye, always searching for contradictions to exploit in debate. This time I read them with different eyes. And I realized the truth I had avoided my entire life. Islam had taught me about power, submission to an all-powerful deity, obedience to unquestionable commands, strength through certainty. But Jesus revealed love. Love that pursued enemies. Love that died for those who hated it. Love that rose from death to prove nothing, not even death, could stop it from reaching those it desired. I wept again, alone in that hotel room, the Bible open on my lap to John's Gospel, for God so loved the world. The presence remained. Waiting. On the fourth day, I returned to the church. I did not plan it. I woke before dawn in my hotel room, the Bible still open beside me from another sleepless night of reading. My body ached from exhaustion. My mind felt raw from 3 days of wrestling with questions that had no easy answers. But I knew I could not leave Spain without understanding what had happened to me. The walk through empty streets felt like a pilgrimage. The fishing village was still asleep, shutters closed, only a few early fishermen preparing their boats in the harbor. The smell of coffee drifted from a single cafe, but I could not imagine eating or drinking anything. St. Teresa's door was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped into the familiar heaviness of sacred space, incense and stone and silence. Morning light filtered through stained glass, painting the floor in reds and blues. Father Esteban knelt before the tabernacle, apparently finishing his morning prayers. He turned at the sound of my entrance, and recognition crossed his weathered face. Not surprise. Recognition. As if he had been expecting me. "You came back," he said in accented English. I stood in the doorway, suddenly uncertain. "I need to understand." He rose slowly, his knees creaking, and gestured toward the front pew. "Sit. Please." I sat at a. He sat beside me, not too close, giving me space. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then the words came tumbling out, not in any logical order, just everything that had been building for 3 days. "I came here to destroy the Eucharist. To prove it was just bread. I had it all planned. I was going to crush it, film it, show everyone that your God was absent." My voice cracked. But when I touched the monstrance, he was there. Jesus was there. He spoke my name. And I felt love. Father Esteban finished gently. I nodded, tears already returning. How is that possible? I was his enemy. I came to humiliate him. Why would he show me love? The priest smiled, not with triumph, but with the sad wisdom of someone who had seen countless souls struggle with this same impossible reality. Because that is who he is. He does not wait for us to be worthy. He loves us into worthiness. But I was taught. I struggled to find words. In Islam, Allah's mercy must be earned. You submit, you obey, you prove yourself, and then perhaps you receive favor. But this? I gestured helplessly toward the tabernacle. This was love I did nothing to deserve. Love that knew everything I had done and loved me anyway. Grace, Father Esteban said. That is what we call it. Unmerited favor. God's love freely given, not because we deserve it, but because He chooses to give it. The wrestling began in earnest then. Everything I had been taught my entire life, about God, about salvation, about the nature of divine love, collided with what I had experienced on that marble floor. If Jesus was truly present in the Eucharist, then the Incarnation was real. If the Incarnation was real, then Jesus was more than a prophet. If Jesus was more than a prophet, then everything Islam taught about him was incomplete at best, false at worst. And if I had been wrong about Jesus, what else had I been wrong about? The questions multiplied like fractures spreading through ice. Each answer I thought I had led to 10 more questions. My entire worldview was collapsing, and I did not know what would replace it. Who is he? I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Really? Not what I was taught. Not what Islam says. Who is he? Father Esteban was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. He is the Son of God. The second person of the Trinity. God made flesh, who came to earth not to conquer but to save. Who died to pay the price for our sins, yours, mine, everyone's. Who rose from death to prove that death itself has been defeated. And who remains present with us, truly and physically, in the Eucharist. Every part of my Islamic training screamed that this was shirk, blasphemy, the ultimate lie. But my experience screamed louder. I felt him, I said. I knew him. It was more real than anything I have ever known. Yes. But how do I reconcile that with everything I have believed? Father Esteban placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. You do not reconcile it, my son. You surrender to it. Truth is not something we construct. It is someone we encounter. And once you have encountered him. He paused. You cannot unknow what you know. That was the moment I realized there was no going back. I could not return to my old certainty. I could not pretend this had not happened. I could not dismiss it as emotion or psychology or some kind of breakdown. The presence had been too real. The love had been too specific. The voice had known my name. I had crossed a line I did not know existed, and there was no retreating behind it. What do I do? I asked. Father Esteban smiled. You begin. That is all. One step, then another. We will walk this together. And so the real journey started, not with answers, but with the willingness to seek them. I did not tell my family immediately. For 3 months, I studied with Father Esteban in secret, learning the Catechism, understanding the Mass, discovering 2,000 years of theology I had spent my life dismissing. I flew back to Spain twice under the pretense of academic research, each time spending hours in that small church, sitting in the same pew where everything had changed. I thought I could keep both worlds separate. I thought I could follow Jesus quietly, privately, without disrupting the life I had always known. I was naive. My father discovered the truth through my own carelessness. I had been reading the Gospels on my phone during a family dinner in Riyadh, forgetting that our family's security detail monitored our devices for threats. A digital copy of the New Testament, downloaded repeatedly. Emails to Father Esteban discussing baptism. Search history full of Catholic apologetics and conversion testimonies. The security chief brought the report to my father personally. I was summoned to his study 3 days later. He sat behind his desk, the same desk where he had taught me the Quran as a child, where he had explained why Christianity was a lie, where he had shaped me into the man I had been. He did not yell. That would have been beneath him. He simply slid a folder across the polished wood surface. My phone records. My emails. Screenshots of my internet history. Explain this, he said, his voice cold as desert night. I could have lied. I could have claimed it was research, academic curiosity, a scholarly project. But standing there, looking at my father's face, the disappointment, the disgust, the certainty that I had betrayed everything our family stood for, I found I could not deny Jesus. Not after he had refused to deny me. It is true, I said quietly. I am converting to Catholicism. The silence that followed was worse than any shout. My father stared at me as if I had become a stranger, someone wearing his son's face but possessed by something foreign and unrecognizable. "You are no longer my son," he finally said. "You are no longer Al-Rashid. As of this moment, you have no family, no title, no inheritance. You are nothing." The formal disownment came within a week. Legal documents severing all family ties. My bank accounts frozen. My diplomatic passport revoked. My security detail reassigned. Every door that had opened automatically my entire life slammed shut in an instant. Friends I had known since childhood stopped answering my calls. Men I had studied with, prayed with, laughed with, all of them vanished as if I had died. In their eyes, I suppose I had. The color they knew no longer existed. Worse than the social death was the physical danger. Apostasy from Islam carries severe consequences in Saudi Arabia. People close to the family began making subtle threats, nothing explicit enough to prosecute, but clear enough to understand. I received messages warning me that traitors to the faith sometimes had accidents. That converts sometimes disappeared. Father Esteban helped me contact organizations that assist Christian converts from Islam. Within 2 months, I had been relocated to an undisclosed country under a name I cannot share. The Saudi government officially lists me as having renounced my citizenship. To my family, I am legally and socially dead. I live now in a small apartment in a city I will not name. I work a job that uses none of my education and pays a fraction of what my monthly allowance used to be. I grocery shop. I do laundry. I take buses. Things I had never done in my life because servants had always done them for me. I have no family to call. No friends from my old life. No one who knew me before November 2, 2021. The loneliness is crushing sometimes. I wake in the middle of the night and forget where I am, expect to hear the call to prayer from the mosque near my father's palace, reach for a life that no longer exists. I miss my mother's voice. I miss my brothers. I miss the weight and certainty of belonging to something larger than myself. I lost everything. My name. My family. My country. My wealth. My position. My entire identity. Every single thing I had built my life upon was stripped away. And yet, on Easter morning, 2023, I knelt in a different church in a different country and was baptized. Father Esteban had flown out to witness it. As the water poured over my head and the priest spoke the words, "I baptize you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit," I felt that presence again. The same presence from the Spanish church. The same love. The same Jesus who had stopped me at the altar and called my name. And I realized something that still brings me to tears: I had not lost everything. I had traded everything. The water was cold. I had imagined my baptism 1,000 times during those long months of preparation, but I had never thought about the temperature of the water. It shocked my skin as Father Esteban poured it over my head, once, twice, 3 times, while speaking words that rewrote my entire existence. "I baptize you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit." Easter morning, 2023. A small parish church in a country I cannot name, with a congregation of strangers who had become family. The priest who performed the sacrament did not know my real name. He did not know I had once been a prince. He only knew I was a convert from Islam who had encountered Jesus in ways I still struggle to explain. As the water dripped down my face, mixing with tears I had not meant to cry, I felt that presence again. The same presence from the Spanish church. The same love that had known my name and refused to let me go. And I understood the sacred irony of my story. the Eucharist I had come to destroy had become the place where my soul was saved. I had walked into St. Teresa's planning to crush bread and expose a lie. I walked out having been crushed myself and exposed to the truth. The hunter had become the prey. The prosecutor had become the defendant. The prince had become the pauper. And I would not trade it for anything. People ask me sometimes if I regret my conversion. If the cost was too high. If I ever wish I could have that old life back, the wealth, the status, the family, the certainty. The answer is always no. Because what I traded was not equal. I did not trade something valuable for something of equal value. I traded everything earthly for everything eternal. I traded the approval of men for the love of God. I traded a name that meant something in palaces for a name written in the book of life. I traded slavery for freedom. Death for life. Darkness for light. Every Sunday now, I kneel before the Eucharist in a church where no one knows who I used to be. I watch the priest elevate the host during consecration, and instead of contempt, I feel awe. Instead of rage, I feel gratitude. Instead of the urge to destroy, I feel the overwhelming desire to worship. I receive communion with hands that once reached out to desecrate, and I taste mercy I will never fully comprehend. The transformation is complete. From prince to pauper. From enemy to beloved son. From someone who tried to prove God was absent to someone who cannot escape his presence no matter where I go. But here is what I need you to understand, my story is not unique. Jesus stops everyone who truly encounters him. The proud are humbled. The certain are shaken. The self-righteous are broken. And the broken are made whole. He stopped Saul on the road to Damascus when Saul was hunting Christians. He stopped the woman at the well when she was avoiding judgment. He stopped Thomas in his doubt. He stopped Peter in his denial. And he stopped me at the altar when I came to destroy him. If Jesus could stop a Saudi prince in the middle of planned desecration, if he could reach through decades of indoctrination and training and certainty to speak one name with such love that it shattered everything, what makes you think he is not calling you? What pride are you holding onto that you think is too strong for him to break? What certainty are you clinging to that you think is too solid for him to shake? What life are you living that you think is too comfortable to surrender? I came into that church believing power was proof of truth. I left knowing that love is the only truth that matters. And that love has a name, Jesus Christ, truly present in the Eucharist, truly risen from the dead, truly calling every human soul to encounter him. You do not have to be a prince to need him. You do not have to plan desecration to be his enemy. All of us, every single one of us, come to him as enemies transformed by grace into children. The question is not whether he is calling you. He is. The question is whether you will answer. I kneel now in obscurity, in exile, in a life I never planned or wanted. I have no earthly kingdom. No family to celebrate with. No inheritance to pass down. But I have Jesus. Really, physically, sacramentally present every time I receive the Eucharist. And he is enough. More than enough. The host I came to destroy holds me together now. The God I tried to humiliate has become my only source of dignity. The love I dismissed as weakness has proven to be the only strength that matters. This is my testimony. This is my witness. This is the exchange I made and would make 1,000 times over. If you are reading this and feeling that presence, that same gentle, insistent, impossible to ignore presence, do not run from it. Do not rationalize it away. Do not let pride convince you that you are too educated, too certain, too far gone to be reached. Jesus stopped a Saudi prince at the altar. He can stop you wherever you are. And when he does, you will discover what I discovered, that losing everything to gain him is not loss at all. It is coming home. I still attend Mass in that unnamed church every Sunday. I still kneel before the Eucharist. And every time the priest elevates the host, I remember the light, the presence, the voice that spoke my name. And I whisper the only words that matter and are more. My Lord and my God.